Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife received secret letters from her lover, but the husband only followed it all from afar. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. It's hard to believe that I graduated from high school 5 years ago. Now I'm a college graduate heading to my 5-year reunion. I wasn't the most popular guy in school. In fact, most people thought I was a nerd. I was of normal height and weight, but because I didn't play sports and was more into computers than most, I was considered a nerd. I was a prefect and got straight A's throughout my studies. I was also named as the one most likely to succeed. I was friends with the so-called nerds. It seemed to me that we had more in common. I never understood why kids always teased each other. Laughing at someone because they are smart has never made sense to me. During my final year of study, I became friends with a lot of students. I didn't interact with most of them, but they treated me pretty decently. I helped many of them with their studies. I didn't have to study much myself. It came quite easily to me. I didn't really date girls in high school. Like every guy, I felt sympathy for different girls. Sandy was one of the cheerleaders who spoke sweetly to me. We were friends, but we weren't dating. I remember telling her that one day she would regret not dating me because I would own my own business. She was the school's flirt, so everyone wanted to date her. She mainly interacted with athletes. And then there was Elizabeth. There was something special about her. She was a mix of African American and Italian. She was one of my friends at school, but she wasn't allowed to date me because I was white. One day, I went to her house, and her father, who was black, said, "Don't take it as a bad thing, but I don't want Beth to date right now. Please understand that it's not you personally, but I want her to learn black culture. So please stay away from her." I couldn't believe it. Beth cried and went to her room. I left, wondering what I had done wrong. When I returned home, I asked my father about it. He told me that there are black people who are just as racist as some white people. He told me that maybe things would work out over time, but for now, I should listen to the man's words. After all, it was his daughter. The next day at school, I saw Beth. She told me that she had a fight with her father because of me. She told her father that she liked me and that I was a good guy. He only got angrier and forbade her to see me. I asked her if she was allowed to date black guys, and she told me that her father had to approve them first. I asked her what her mom thought about dating since she was white. She told me that her mother said that one day she would live on her own and be able to make her own decisions, but for now, she would have to listen to her father. During our senior year, I saw her dating a couple of football players. She was also a cheerleader, and they tended to date jocks. I dated a couple of times with girls I knew, but we didn't have a night. My first time was at a college party, but that's another story. I went to homecoming. As I already mentioned, I graduated from college and founded my own computer company. For a young guy, everything worked out great for me. I actually started my business when I was a freshman in college. My father gave me an advance, and I have already paid him back. So I was going to the meeting as an entrepreneur. I've earned the title of most likely to succeed. I went to homecoming, and it was fun to see all the kids from my class. Many of them had changed. After logging in, I first walked around and talked to my so-called geek friends. Most of them were college graduates and worked in various business fields. Some of my athlete friends had changed a lot. Some graduated from college, while others dropped out or did not receive scholarships to attend college. Almost everyone at the meeting had some kind of work to do. I learned that we had lost 4 students from our class. 2 died in service, 1 died of leukemia, and the last committed suicide. It really makes you wonder how fragile life really is. I should note that I was no longer considered a computer geek. I worked out in the gym and had a good physique, but it was not related to muscles, it was just toned. I think I could stand up for myself if necessary, but I never had any arguments. As I was sipping my beer, this beautiful blonde approached me. I knew it was Sandy. As the saying goes, she was built like a brick house. She ran up to me and kissed me on the lips. I have to say that I never expected this. I spoke first. "Well, hello Sandy. You look as gorgeous as ever. What have you been doing for the last few years?" Hi, Robert. God, it's so nice to see you. I heard you have your own business and have returned to our big city. I moved out of state to go to college. I had a full scholarship and decided to take advantage of the best offer. Yes, I know, and yes, I did that. These days I prefer to be called Rob. Many people just call me Jonesy, but you can call me whatever you want. So, did you go to college or something? I asked. I went to community college for 2 years, got a business degree, and worked as a secretary in the Montgomery building, she replied. Are you married, divorced, dating now? She asked. There is no woman in my life yet. Would you like to apply for this position? I laughed. That sounds like a proposal to me, she laughed. I can just take you on. She leaned over and kissed me again. Damn, she was hot. I spent the evening talking to everyone. Sandy kept coming back to me. A few guys told me a little about Sandy since she left school. They said she got her degree and worked as a secretary in the Montgomery building, but she was considered a hot mom. I asked what they meant, and they told me that she dated a lot of guys. She was looking for Mr. Right, or should I say Mr. Rich. Bob stated that she was engaged to a guy named JN for about a year, but it didn't last long. She was looking for security, someone who has money to support her. Brad, the guy she dated in high school, was a year ahead of us, which is why he wasn't at our alumni meeting. He dropped out of college and worked at a local business. He probably couldn't meet her financial demands either. I asked about Beth, but no one seemed to know much about her. I really wanted to see the woman she turned into. She didn't respond to the reunion form, so of course, she wasn't there. I saw a couple of her close friends, at least they were 5 years ago. They told me that Beth had settled down well and had completed her degree. Last they heard, she got married. It somehow touched me inside. I didn't care that she was mixed race, I really cared about her. As the reunion was ending, Sandy came up to me and asked me to call her. She kissed me again, and I went home. I couldn't believe my luck. The homecoming queen, the cheerleader everyone wanted, asked me to call her. I mentioned that I have my own computer business. I had 2 good guys who worked for me, although I rented a small building. I usually worked from home. Of course, I went to the office every day and made sure that things were in order. I also had a sweet receptionist who made appointments and answered calls. It was cheaper to pay a secretary and let my guys fix the computers. I did most of the larger business jobs where I had to travel to companies and do setups and repairs. I called Sandy the following Monday and asked if she wanted to have lunch. We met at one of the local restaurants and reminisced about old times. It seemed like she was an old girlfriend of mine from the way she talked to me. She said how she always liked me and how she regretted that we didn't date. You have to understand that although I was smart, I was not very worldly wise. I was a pretty naive guy. Sandy was looking for money and a man with a future. Apparently, it was me, but I didn't realize it at the time. All I saw was intim with a hot babe. My hormones were working overtime. I can't say I loved her, but I definitely wanted her. We started dating and had an intimate on our first date. Sandy was hot. This girl was a machine. From the moment we walked into my condo until she left the next day, it was all-night intim. Like I said, I had a night with a couple of girls in college, but it was nothing compared to Sandy. We accomplished more in that one night than I had done in my entire short life. Sandy started coming over to my place about 3 times a week, and we would have an intim. We had been dating for about 3 months when she asked me about marriage. I asked her why there was a rush, and she told me she was pregnant. I told her, of course, I would marry her, especially because I got her pregnant. We were going to have a very small ceremony and get married in front of a judge with just a couple of witnesses. I told my mom and dad about the wedding and pregnancy. They weren't the happiest about it, but they agreed to go along with whatever I wanted to do. My father told me to have a prenuptial agreement in case the marriage didn't last. I told him that I had done this. I must say a few words about night with Sandy. It was fantastic. I learned a lot about an intimate from her. I can't say I loved Sandy, but I really enjoyed a night with her. One thing that really bothered me was how good Sandy was. She couldn't have learned this overnight. I often wondered how many intimate partners she had. This was something we agreed never to talk about, which was probably a big mistake on my part. As I mentioned, I wasn't sure I loved Sandy, but I got her pregnant, and it was my baby, so I was going to do everything right for the baby. About 2 months after our wedding, I was looking for aspirin. Sandy was at work, and I was looking everywhere. For some crazy reason, I even looked in our drawers. I knew Sandy kept a lot of her beauty products in one of her drawers and thought she might have something like Excedrin or something. I did find her pregnancy pills. I wondered if I should confront her with my findings or wait to see what she had to say. Now I was a little angry. I didn't like being used, and that's exactly what Sandy did. I remembered the Desperate Housewives episode where the husband replaced his wife's birth control pills with sugar pills. I decided to do the same. I went to the pharmacy and found pills that were as close as possible to her pregnancy pills and came home to replace the rest of her pack for this month and the pack she had for the next month. It wasn't easy, but I managed to do it. I made sure that Sandy and I had a night almost every night. I checked a couple of days later, and she was still taking the pills. After about a month and a half, Sandy said she wasn't feeling well. She felt nauseous and had a stomach ache. I told her it was probably due to pregnancy. She looked at me and said, "Rob, I think the pregnancy was a false alarm. I was afraid to tell you because I didn't want you to think I tricked you into marrying me." I wondered how long it would take her to come up with some excuses. The problem is that if I divorced her, we had a prenuptial agreement, and she wouldn't really get much. This made me wonder if she was telling the truth. "Sandy, you can confide in me. Isn't that what marriages are all about? I would like to be a father, and maybe that will still happen. You're not taking pregnancy pills, right?" She was silent for a few seconds before answering, "No, of course not. I'm not taking pregnancy pills. Maybe it will still happen." She tried to force herself to smile, but I knew she had just lied to me. "Well, you better find time to go to the doctor and get rid of this flu or whatever you got. I'll make an appointment for you tomorrow, and we'll go together at lunchtime." She knew better than to argue because she felt like she had deceived me about the pregnancy again. I made her appointment and drove her to the building for lunch. She went out at lunchtime and jumped into the car. I took her to the clinic. I even went in and sat with her until it was time for her to see the doctor. Before I left, I mentioned to the doctor that she thought she was pregnant, but apparently she wasn't. After the examination, the doctor asked Sandy to wait with me in the waiting room. Then he invited us both into his office. There was a smile on his face. "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you're going to be parents after all. I'd say in about 7.5 months. Congratulations." "No, it must be a mistake," Sandy countered. "No mistake, Sandy. That's why I asked you to wait until I rechecked the tests," the doctor replied. I looked at Sandy and said, "Isn't this wonderful? We're going to be mom and dad after all." Before Sandy could say anything, I leaned over and kissed her in front of the doctor. I thanked the doctor, and we got up and left the office. Sandy didn't have many words. After all, she had been taking pregnancy pills all this time and told me that she was not taking them. Now she was trapped by her own lies. I told everyone about the pregnancy so Sandy wouldn't try to do something stupid. She's always felt uneasy about her figure, and now she's pregnant. After a couple of months, we were still having good intimate, but Sandy's mind was elsewhere. One day I asked her if she was going to quit her job and become a housewife. She told me she would never quit her job. She wasn't sure what she would do when she was 6 months pregnant and really starting to show. She told me she didn't want a baby. She hadn't said anything before because she thought she might love the idea of becoming a mother. She told me that she was not cut out for motherhood and did not want a child. She thought about abortion, but now it was too late. No doctor would perform an abortion in the 6th month of pregnancy. Maybe she'll give the baby up for adoption. I was stunned. I told her that although she was carrying the baby, it was also my baby. When we first got married, it was because we thought we were having a baby. I thought we would be a happy married couple. I wasn't going to let her have an abortion or give away our baby. I honestly couldn't believe that a mother didn't want her child. It made me sad every time I thought about it. We argued day after day about the baby. She said that she would give birth to it, but it would not stop her from living her life. She is too young to sit at home and look after a child. If I want a child, then it is my job to take care of it. I knew from that day that our marriage was on the decline. It should be mentioned that Sandy was raised by her grandmother. Her mother was unmarried and became pregnant. Then after the birth, she left the baby, Sandy, to be raised by her grandmother. Sandy told me that she only saw her mother a couple of times when she was little. Her mother moved to California to become a star. I don't think she ever got any movie roles other than as an extra. Sandy must have inherited her beauty from her mother. She also seems to have gained some of her mother's personality traits. She never knew who her father was. Her grandmother was still living, but she was over 60. I talked to her, and she wanted to be in her child's life, but, of course, could not take care of the child. My mom and dad were happy about the pregnancy. They were sad about the way Sandy treated the child. After all, the child did not ask to be born. Now I sat and thought about the trick I pulled on Sandy. God, I would never have done this if she had told me the truth from the beginning. It was my fault she got pregnant. Now it was my responsibility to make sure this child had a chance at a good life. With a mother who didn't care about her and a probably stupid father, the child already had one strike against her. Yes, it was a girl. When she was born, she was the sweetest, most innocent thing I've ever seen. She was beautiful. I decided then and there that she would have a good life. I was going to be the kind of father she would be proud of. After the birth of the child, our family life went downhill. Sandy did some motherly things when she was at home. I really thought she was changing her mind about the baby. After all, the child came out of her body, it was part of her. I hired a full-time nanny who treated Abby like her own child. Abby was a short form of Abigail. I named her after Sandy's grandmother. I took Abby to see her great-grandmother every week. Her great-grandmother adored the child. It was impossible not to love such a sweet baby. I assumed that was why Sandy started working longer hours. She didn't want to be home and get attached to her daughter. I asked Sandy if she thought we should all get some kind of therapy or counseling. The reluctance to be a part of your child's life must have come from somewhere within. Of course, she said, the only problem I have is that I let you talk me into having a baby. I should have sued the birth control company because their pills didn't work. She looked at me dumbfounded as she realized what she had just said. I looked at her and just stared. I didn't say a word. She thought she knew what I was thinking. Why did you trick me into marrying you? Why didn't you tell me you didn't want kids? Was it always about the money? I asked. I love you, Rob, but you never asked me to marry you. We've only been dating for 3 months. What would you do if you knew my past? If you knew the different men I've been with, you might not have asked me to marry you. I wanted a secure future, and I knew you always cared about me. I was sad thinking about what to do next. I thought my marriage was coming to an end, but I was still going to try for the sake of my daughter. The next morning, I walked into the office and received a call from the receptionist in the Montgomery building. I was a little confused, knowing that Sandy worked there. I called back and was asked to come in about installing computers. It would be a big bill if I got the job. I didn't want to tell Sandy about it in case I didn't get it. I arrived and was greeted by the receptionist. Sandy worked on the 18th floor, and I went up to the vice president's floor. Jim Smith met me. I was nervous when I introduced myself as Rob Jones. There was something funny about the names Smith and Jones. We immediately decided to address each other by our first names. Rob, I heard that if you need computer work, your company is one of the best. Yes, we try to please the customers. We try to give the customer what they want. What do you need? It seems the systems here are pretty new, I replied. Honestly, Rob, we want to install a CCTV system. The owner of the building installed a system, but we want our own. Someone from inside is tampering with company documents and passing information to our competitors. It must be the work of someone from inside. This has been going on for a few weeks. When you look at CCTV footage, doesn't it show who is in the building at any given time? Isn't there a system for recording security about who is in the building after hours? I asked. Rob, the answer to both of your questions is yes. Mrs. Jones, my secretary, thinks that since most of our employees have access keys to the building and offices, they must have found a way in and know how to bypass the existing cameras. She suggested that your firm could install miniature security cameras and hide them in legal places because we don't want anyone to know where they are except me, you, and of course someone from our legal department to make sure we don't break the law. Do you think you can handle it? No problem, Jim. Just tell me where you want the cameras and where to place the CCTV monitoring computers. I'd like to meet Mrs. Jones and thank her for the recommendation. Maybe we're related, I laughed. I doubt you're related. I'm sure she would have mentioned it. She's gone for a few days on personal business. Maybe you can meet her another time. Rob, I know your wife works in the building, and I must ask you not to say a word to her about it. We want as few people as possible to know about it. No problem. I'll make sure she won't find out. If she happens to see me, I'll just tell her I'm here to work on a couple of computers. Now, if you show me what's on your mind, I'll give you my recommendations and we'll look at what's best for your needs and cost effectiveness. We quickly toured the premises, and Jim showed me the various entrances leading to confidential computers. He explained that they had 2 computer networks set up, one for use by all employees, and the second network could only be used by senior partners and a few promising managers. The second set of computers could only be accessed from the 22nd to the 24th floors. This still allowed access to enough people working on those floors or managers who were permitted to use them. Jim was pretty sure it was someone coming in after hours and using the computers to extract information. This would be too much of a risk during normal business hours. I asked Jim about passwords to access the computers, as well as login times, personal codes, login codes, or any other method they have for tracking computer usage. He explained that there was a general code to log into the computer and then a personal code that allowed the employee to use all network resources. I suggested to Jim that he let me install a program that would record login times after business hours on a network basis since there were many computers that could be used. This would also give us the code entered by the user. I additionally suggested installing hidden cameras with a timer inside each entrance door. They would trigger when the door is opened and take a photo of everyone who enters after hours. Between the time snapshot and the time we logged into the computer, we could narrow down the possible offenders. Jim liked my ideas because they didn't interfere with anyone's privacy. His computer would be the only one that sees who enters the main offices after hours. I asked him if he needed additional approval, but he said he would discuss it with the legal department and didn't foresee any problems. He wanted to keep as few people informed as possible. I told Jim I was going to go down to the 18th floor to see my wife in case someone saw me and mentioned it to her. I knew several people who worked in the building. When I got off the elevator, I didn't see my wife at her desk. I saw her sitting on the corner of a desk in the office of one of the junior managers. Because the door was not completely closed, it looked a little out of place. I asked one of the other secretaries, Tara, if she had seen Sandy loud enough that I knew Sandy would hear me. Tara looked a little embarrassed as she looked up at me. Almost immediately, Sandy came out of the manager's office and asked what I was doing there. I was nearby and thought we could have lunch together, I said. Oh, I wish you'd called ahead. I have a meeting and lunch event today. Maybe another time, she replied with an insincere smile. I looked at Tara, and she didn't look up at me. I thought Sandy was lying to me or didn't want to have lunch with me. I told her I'd see her later. After giving her a light kiss, I headed towards the elevator. As I passed the manager's door, I checked his name, Dave Conrad. I had to remember this for future reference. 2 days later, I received a call from Jim. Our plan was approved. I got the materials and supplies we needed and went back to install the equipment. Jim arranged access for me by telling people that I was a computer repair guy. I brought an assistant so we could do it faster. Before I left the office, I went through the usual ton of emails. I received an unusual letter that said, "Private, please open me." I assumed it was some company selling Viagra or something like that, but it was a personal letter. The letter said, "Robert, I think Sandy is cheating on you. I just thought you should know." The letter was not signed, so I decided to find out where it was sent from. The person who sent it tried to cover his tracks, but that's my business. I traced it through 2 online email accounts, and it led back to the computers in the Montgomery building. It looked like the anonymous letter came from someone who worked there, but who? This bothered me because since Sandy had her baby, she seemed more distant. Now I had to wonder if the child was mine if this letter was true. I decided to call Sandy and tell her that I had computer repair work in her building and asked if we could have lunch together. She said she would check with her boss and get back to me. So I told her I would see her at the office. This seemed a little strange to me. She's just an ordinary secretary. Why does she always have to work during lunch? It seemed a little suspicious. We entered the building with our boxes of equipment and headed to Jim's office. I left my equipment and went down to see Sandy. What a surprise, she was at her desk. Approaching her, she told me that she was now free for lunch and kissed me lightly. I looked to the side and saw that this guy David's door was closed. There was something wrong with him. I told Sandy I'd see her in a couple of hours and went up to start setting up the hidden cameras. My assistant and I ran a cable into Jim's office, and I used an earpiece so we could communicate with each other. On the 22nd and 23rd floors, I had to run wiring to other computers, otherwise, it would have cost a lot of money to run all the lines to Jim's office. We simply chose a shared office on each floor and connected the cameras to the computer. No one would know of its existence, so they wouldn't look for images. I set up Jim's computer so that he could connect to computers on other floors and download images of anyone who entered those floors after hours. I told him I would come back in a few days to see how everything worked. I stopped at lunchtime to go with Sandy for lunch. She asked me what exactly I was doing there. I told her that several computers had broken down and I was repairing them. She mentioned that several people had seen me with Jim, the vice president. Yes, he was the one who called me. Looks like the company that services your computers couldn't get there fast enough. It was a lucky break for me because it's a pretty big bill. I added that some people looked at me strangely to see her reaction. This wasn't true because Jim kept most people away. This made Sandy look a little nervous. She told me she might have to stay an hour or two tonight. I asked her why she had been working so much overtime in the last couple of months. Her response was that she was trying to get ahead, so she voluntarily stayed when asked. She hinted that after the birth of her child, it became more difficult for her to advance in her career. Everyone thought she should stay home with the baby. I just shrugged it off. I would never sacrifice my child for her career. After completing the hardware installation, I needed to return to our computer office to drop off any extra supplies. I logged into my email and received another message. "Robert, I'm so sorry I had to tell you about Sandy. I heard anecdotally that her ex-boyfriend works at the company. She's been dating him for about a month now. He started working here in the Montgomery building as a security guard about a month ago. I just thought you should know. I knew you probably already figured out that I work here in the same building as your wife. Signed, friend." It was unexpected, but I had suspected something similar. I needed to decide what to do next. I didn't intend to live like this. When Sandy got home, she went straight to the shower. Later, I tried to have a night with her. She was reluctant at first, but eventually, she let me have my way. I really hoped that she wasn't cheating on me, although I watched her actions as if she were. I waited a couple of days and went to see Jim again. He said the CCTV cameras were working well. He showed me some of the photographs he had received. These were pictures of some managers and secretaries working late. There were also photographs of the guards making their rounds. I recognized one guard who seemed familiar to me. It was Brad, Sandy's ex-boyfriend from her high school days. I hadn't told Jim anything yet because Brad didn't seem to be doing anything out of the ordinary. Jim tracked his manager's login times. He was surprised that many people worked until late. This made his task of finding violations more difficult. As we were looking at some photos, I was surprised to see Sandy walking through the door. She followed her boss, Dave. I asked Jim about Dave, and he said he was an up-and-coming manager, and Sandy was his personal secretary. Jim looked at the login times and was surprised to find that a couple of managers were not logged in but were on the upper floors. Dave was one of them. He quickly flipped through the cameras to see how much time Dave and Sandy had spent together. It was almost half an hour. They were on the 22nd floor. Another manager and his secretary went up to the 23rd floor for about half an hour. A couple of days later, Jim called me again. He asked me to come to his office. It was both business and personal, and he didn't want to discuss it over the phone. When I arrived at his office, he was looking at the CCTV footage again. "Rob, I think I have a few problems. Marie, my secretary, and I were discussing some recordings. We think we need another hidden camera in our break room. We have a break room on the 23rd and 24th floors. They are used when we invite clients and interact with them in a more intimate environment. They are furnished like living rooms with sofas and comfortable chairs. They also have drink and snack stations." "No problem, Jim, we can install more hidden cameras. Do you expect misuse of rooms after hours?" I asked. "Does Sandy have anything to do with this? You said it was also a personal matter." "Sandy has gone up with one of the managers after work about 3 times since the video surveillance was installed. That in itself doesn't mean anything since he's her boss, but it's strange that they never logged into the system, so there was no reason for them to be here. Our middle managers come up here when they need special information. As I told you, there are drink machines on every floor, so no one has to come up here just for that. According to the timeline, they spend about half an hour here. We hope we are wrong, but we cannot accuse anyone of misconduct without evidence." "I understand, Jim. My marriage is already in a difficult situation. I need the truth too," I replied. Marie, my secretary, noticed that the guard's schedule was also strange. "He spends too much time on the 23rd floor. One time he came shortly after your wife went up. I don't know if you know, but you went to school at the same time as the security guard." "His name is Brad Evans," Jim said. "Yeah, I know him. He was Sandy's ex-boyfriend," I said, shaking my head sadly. "Well, he was here again yesterday. Of course, he's supposed to come through and check the offices, but Marie said someone got into our records yesterday and used the ID of Dave Conrad, your wife's boss. Dave Conrad was never on the floor. We're wondering if Brad is our suspect for stealing the information. He must have been given an ID from somewhere. We've been changing IDs once a week lately as a security measure. We believe Sandy was giving him the ID," he said. It was hard for me, although I had my suspicions. It's still difficult when you find out the truth. Now I had to install the program for the proof the company required. It probably cost me my marriage. Hell, my marriage was a sham anyway. The only good thing that came out of this was my daughter. The next day, Sandy called me and said she would be working late. I called Jim to let him know the situation. I wanted him to be ready. He thanked me and said he would keep me posted with any updates. I wanted to get a little revenge, so I called Sandy after work and told her I installed a camera in the break room. I assumed that by then the dirty deed was done. I heard her scream, "No, God, no, you couldn't do that," and then she hung up. It was getting late, and Sandy had to go home. I was holding my daughter, thinking about her mother who didn't want her, when the phone rang. It was Jim. "Rob, please come as soon as you can. Sandy is dead." A wave of shock went through me. I was completely stunned. It took me a minute to come to my senses. I didn't even ask what happened. I just told him I would. My tears flowed, and I held my daughter who smiled back at me. What a mix of emotions I had. I called my mom and told her that something had happened to Sandy and she was dead. My mom screamed into the phone, "Oh my God." I told her that I would leave my daughter with her, possibly all night. I needed to find out what happened. I felt like I was half fainting when I was packing things for the baby. I think I was in a state of semi-shock. I left Abby with my mom, hugged her, and headed to the Montgomery building. When I entered the lobby, there were many police officers there. I told them who I was, and one of them took me to Jim's office. Jim was also in a fog. He hugged me. "I'm so sorry, Rob." I went into the office to check the cameras and found that Sandy had been killed. We were looking at the videotape and she was with Dave. Now the police have gone to his house to question him. "I don't think you should watch that footage, Rob. What exactly is on it, Jim? Does it show a murder? I asked. No, it's Sandy having an intimate with Dave. I think after they left, someone noticed the camera and cut the wires. We don't have footage of the murder itself, but since no one knew about the cameras at the entrance, we have photos of Sandy with the security guard Brad coming through the door. Only Brad is seen leaving the office. The police have issued a warrant for him and are now looking for him. We believe that Brad is the killer, but we are not ruling out anyone. In fact, the police have questioned me and they also need to talk to you too, Jim said. Jim and I were practically marked as uninvolved. I told the investigator what Sandy had said about the camera, but only about the one in the hall. Although I did not kill Sandy, I felt partially responsible for her death. If I hadn't told her about the camera, she might be alive today. Dave was brought in and questioned. He was shocked to learn that Sandy had been killed. He said he didn't do it. He loved Sandy and they were both going to get divorced and marry each other. The investigator showed him the recording in the hall and he began to cry. He had an intimate with Sandy, which turned out to be their last time. I loved her. I really loved her, he said. How did she know your passwords? Asked the investigator. Dave looked at the officer. She told me that if I loved her, I wouldn't keep secrets from her, so I gave her my passwords. You have to trust me. I loved her and would never hurt her. She didn't want kids, so I even got a vasectomy for her last month to prove my love. She was going to come home tonight and tell her husband she was leaving him. It's the truth, honestly, it's the truth. Dave started crying again. The officers let me go but told me not to leave the city. Now the hunt has been announced for Brad Evans. The next morning, the investigator called me and said that they had detained Brad as he was leaving town. He said he didn't kill Sandy and we have no proof. It looked like he decided he destroyed the camera, and we couldn't prove anything. He was shown footage of him leaving the floor with Sandy several times and then footage of them going into the comfort room together and only him coming out. He gave in and told his story. Sandy had left him several years ago because he couldn't provide for her financially. He said he was devastated to lose her. He learned that he could steal important data from the Montgomery Foundation and sell it on the black market. This brought in a lot of money, so he got a job as a security guard at the Montgomery building and began dating Sandy. She had a night with him, and he convinced her to get the codes, promising to share the wealth with her. He said night with her was always the best. He expected that as soon as he received the data and sold it, she would leave with him. When she told him that it was just an intimate for her and she wasn't going to leave with him, he got angry. That night, she came to him and told him that her husband had installed a camera that showed them having a night. They had no idea how the camera worked or how long it had been there, so he found it and cut the wires. He told Sandy that they had better leave town now. She laughed at him and said that she wouldn't get fired for having an intimate. She had slept with half the men in the building. Brad said, "It hit me like a bolt from the blue. I loved her and would do anything for her. I was stealing for her right then, and she was laughing at me. I had a knife in my hand, and I did it. When I came to my senses, I cleaned everything I touched and left the building. I loved her, but she went too far." It was a couple of days after the funeral when Jim called me. He again expressed his condolences. He had come to the funeral a few days ago. He said he had spoken to the board of directors, and they wanted to know if I was interested in managing their account. It turns out that Brad had all the discs in his car with information about their new products. They hadn't had time to hand them over to him yet. The company could save tens of thousands of dollars or more by quickly installing our surveillance equipment. The board also fired Dave and another manager for having a night with their secretaries in the building. This will not be tolerated in this business, especially with married employees. Of course, I said that I would be happy to take on the job, and Jim asked me to come that afternoon if possible, and we could discuss it over lunch. I told the nanny that I might stay a little longer and asked if she could stay if needed. She said it wouldn't be a problem. As I kissed my little daughter goodbye, for those who wondered if Abby was my baby, she was. I passed the tests, but I would have kept her anyway. She was a huge part of my life. None of this was her fault. I went up to Jim's office. I got a few strange looks because of the situation last week, but life goes on. Jim asked if I would mind if his secretary Marie came with us. I said of course, because she was the one who first suggested my company. Jim mentioned that he had a few things to finish before we could leave and said I could go meet Marie. I walked into an office with Marie Jones written on the door. The woman looked up at me, and it was Beth. Tears welled up in my eyes as she walked around her desk to hug me. She was beautiful. She looked neither black nor white. She looked like a dark-skinned Italian. She must have gotten the best traits from both her parents. Beth, it's you. It's really you. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? I asked about you, and no one saw you. Did you change your name? I asked. Calm down, Robert. I'll explain everything. God, how I missed you. You were my first love, even though we didn't do anything, she smiled. My name is Elizabeth Marie Jones. Yes, I said Jones, just like you. Unfortunately, I married the wrong Jones. I graduated from college and got a job here as a secretary, and they liked my work, so I was promoted to executive secretary. Jim is my immediate boss. As you know, he's a pretty nice guy. Why the name change? I asked. I just started using my middle name in college. I couldn't go to my homecoming because I was in the hospital. I had a miscarriage. My husband and I got into an argument about him cheating, and he pushed me, and I fell down the stairs. I filed for divorce, and it's now finalized. I just haven't gotten my maiden name back yet. I like the name Jones, she smiled. Does Jim know you know me? I asked. At first, no. After he hired you, I told him I knew you. I wanted you to get the job. I thought after they saw how good your work was, they might hire you for their computer work, she said. At that moment, Jim entered. I'm glad we hired you, Rob. I'm really sorry about everything that happened, but you did our company a great favor. Well, if you two are ready, we can head out to lunch. Since our meeting, I have remained in close contact with both Jim and Beth. When they called, I tried to provide them with fast and efficient service. I wanted to ask Beth out, but I was afraid of rejection. After all, I remember what her father told me many years ago. We sometimes went to lunch together, but I always felt tension between us. I was sure Beth felt it too. I should mention that we talked about how she wrote me a letter about Sandy cheating on her. She said Sandy never recognized her at work. Of course, they moved in different circles. It was one thing to date when she was single, but after she got married, she didn't stop. When Beth found out that she married me, she was really angry. Jim, her boss, spoke to her one day and told her that someone was hacking into the computer system. That's when she mentioned me and my business. She also thought it would be a good time to tell me about Sai's extramarital affairs. She said she knew what it was because her husband cheated on her too. As time went on, Abby and I got used to our life. Abby was the best thing that happened to me. It's hard for me to explain, but being a father is a big responsibility, especially now that we have become a single-parent family. Abby's first birthday arrived, and I went to pick up Grandma Sandy. She was still a part of little Abby's life. Of course, she was very sad about Sai's death, but she wanted to be part of the family and get to know little Abby, who was so much like Sandy. My parents came too. Someone knocked on the door, and I opened it. It was Beth. I came to the party. I hope it's okay, she said. Your father invited me. I looked at my father, and he was smiling. You talk about her all the time. She's like part of the family, and your mother and I wanted to meet her, my father replied. I was a little uncomfortable, but I introduced Beth to everyone. I asked her if her name was Beth or Marie, and she said her old friends still called her Beth. If someone asked about Marie, she knew it was on business. She looked great even in jeans and a blouse. She sat up, and Abby half crawled and half walked towards her. Oh my God, what a beautiful little girl you are, she told Abby, picking her up and hugging her. I wish I had a little girl like you. Abby hugged Beth back. Beth continued to hold her. Happy birthday, Abby. Are you 1 year old today? She asked. Abby nodded in response. Her father asked Beth about her job and education, more to make her feel comfortable than out of curiosity. After all, as my parents said, I always talk about her. Mom stood up and called everyone into the kitchen to sing happy birthday to Abby. She then cut the cake, and we all talked and watched Abby open her gifts. Abby's grandmother, or Sai's grandmother, took a lot of photographs. She truly was a sweet woman who had a lot of problems in her life. My mom and dad got to know her well and often invited her to their place. Some people are simply unlucky. After the party, when everyone was playing and hanging out with little Abby, Beth and I sat on the porch and talked. "What made you come today?" I asked. "I know it's Abby's birthday, but what made you come? Abby seems to really like you. You're the reason I came, and you know it. I've been waiting for you to ask me out, and you never did. It's been 4 months since the tragedy, and we've had dinner at least 6 times with Jim and once alone. I really care about you, and I'm tired of waiting. So when your father called me, I decided to take the first step. Do you want to take the second step?" "Oh, my God, Beth, I want hundreds of steps. I was afraid to ask you out. I know we're older, but I don't want your dad to hate me and be mad at you. I've been taking care of you since high school. You know that my feelings have never changed for you. Then ask me out on a real date. Dinner, a good show, and who knows, maybe you'll get lucky on the second date." She laughed. "What about your parents, Beth? I would really like them to like me. Does your dad still have problems with white boys?" Beth laughed. "You know I had a miscarriage. What I never told you is that after Tony, my ex, pushed me and I fell, my father beat the hell out of Tony. He told him that if he reported the beating, he would stop doing it. My father is just very protective of me. When I graduated, he told me that if you tried your best to date me, he would give up. By then, you were already in college, and I never had the chance to tell you. Okay, let's go somewhere next Saturday, and after that, we'll go on our second date. If you still want to date me after this, then I will talk to your father. I will make him love me." I smiled. "So, do you want to get lucky before you talk to my father?" I asked. "Damn right," I laughed. We went on our first date, and it was great. She was as bright and beautiful as I had always imagined. At the end of the evening, she kissed me. It was sweet and passionate at the same time. After the third kiss, she said, "Wait, Robert. This is our first date. You hit a single, and I'm just as eager for a home run as you are. But a deal is a deal," she laughed. "Let's go somewhere again tomorrow," I suggested. "I have a better idea," Beth said. "Let's take Abby to the aquarium so she can see all the fish and stuff. The only thing is, you won't have any luck until the next date. It's not a date, it's more of a family outing. I just want to be with you, and I want you to like Abby," I replied. "Do you like her?" "I love her," Beth said. "I don't care if she has blonde hair and blue eyes. She's the sweetest little girl I've ever seen." The next day, we took Abby to the aquarium, and Beth and I held hands when I wasn't pushing the stroller. I felt like we were family. On my way home, I passed Beth's parents' house. We all got out and walked to the door. Beth almost laughed. I didn't know why. Beth's mom opened the door and smiled at me when she saw us. "Please come in," she said. "Mrs. Durant, is Mr. Durant home?" "I'd like to talk to him," I asked. Mr. Durant entered the room. Beth stood behind me, holding Abby, and her mom stood next to her husband. "Mr. Durant, I am Robert Jones, and I would like your permission to meet with your daughter. I spoke to you about 7 years ago and made the mistake of leaving. I care about Beth very much and will treat her with the utmost care. I know we don't need your permission because we're adults, but I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us." "Slow down, son," Mr. Durant said. "One might think that you are asking permission to marry her. With all due respect, sir, this may happen in the future." "I mention this so we all know where we are," I replied. Mrs. Durant spoke. "Ted, tell the boy the truth. Robert, Beth and I talked about you for a long time. You have our... I don't want to say permission, we don't mind Beth dating you. We bless you both regarding marriage. Why did you already bring this up?" Well, Mrs. Durant, as you can see, I have a daughter, Abby. She is my pride and joy. When and if we get married, I just wanted you to know that you will have a beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed granddaughter, I answered. Mr. Durant reached out to Abby, who walked right up to him. She hugged and kissed him. Robert, if it came to marriage, I would have no problem loving this little girl. We were all smiling as I shook Mr. Durant's hand and gave Mrs. Durant a light hug. Beth, Abby, and I left the house, and I drove Beth home after kissing her goodnight. Abby and I headed home. I asked my mom if she could watch Abby next Saturday. Beth and I were going to a concert and dinner out of town. We probably won't be back until Sunday afternoon. I wanted to tell you, readers, how lucky I am. It was too good not to tell the world about it. I felt like I had won a grand slam when I held Beth. She looked amazing in the blue dress, which had a low cut exposing some of her chest and was short enough to reach a few inches above her knees. I asked her if she was wearing panties. She slapped me and then laughed. As I mentioned, Beth looked like she was half Italian with a beautiful deep tan. We continued dating, knowing that we were a couple. We were going to date for about 6 months and then get engaged. When the time came, it was no surprise to anyone. We just felt it was right to wait a little while. I remember when we were dating, I told Beth that she was the first black woman I had been with. She looked at me and said she better be the last woman, black or white, that I sleep with. She then told me that I was the only white man she had been with and planned to keep it that way. Our wedding was small, just family and a few friends. I remember Beth's father saying she didn't even need to change her name again. It was funny that out of everyone at our wedding, Abby chose to sit on Mr. Durant's lap. I must say, he was a proud grandfather. He wasn't as biased as I thought he was, more of a concerned father. Of course, Beth is an amazing mother to Abby. She does everything with her. I look back and think about life and the differences in people. There was Sandy, a beautiful woman who could have had it all, a worthy profession, a loving husband, and a beautiful daughter. She decided to give it all up in search of what she thought would be better. Then there's Beth, another beautiful woman who wanted a family and ended up finding a guy who wasn't satisfied and also wanted more. Beth lost her baby to her idiot husband. Beth's parents made it work, my parents made it work, even Abby Sr., despite all her difficulties, had a loving great-granddaughter. I believe that life is what you make it. Of course, not everything is perfect, but you have to do your best. If you try hard enough, you can do it. Don't worry about what someone else has. Look at your life and the life of your family and see what you can do with what God has given you. Beth, Abby, and I are proof that anything can work, a geek, a stunning mixed-race woman, and a beautiful little girl. Who would have thought that we could become the perfect family? What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the wife should have said right away that she has a lover, because it makes no sense for her husband to guess. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.